An eventful week number 12 is pretty much in the books. Still 2 games left to go here on Monday and Tuesday night, but a lot of big takeaways here because we saw some big performances from exciting players like Antonio Gibson, Austin Ekeler back on the field, and of course Tyreek Hill and Derrick Henry going nuts. We're going to break it all down and let you know how to handle those guys and others going forward in NFL DFS. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by Numberfire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and Numberfire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for Numberfire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for Numberfire.com. Brandon, pretty fun week 12. How you doing today?
Yeah, I was actually thinking yesterday. It's weird because we broke down that Baltimore-Pittsburgh game on Tuesday.
Yep.
And in preparation for Thursday, and it still has not happened, which it was very strange. But yeah, I mean, overall, got some, like you said, some flashes from some exciting players. You and I were both in on Tyreek Hill, I think, on the preview show on Wednesday, and that paid off because his target numbers are just amazing. But yeah, lots to go over from a good week of football.
Yeah, and I think that this is a good week. It exemplified the value in having a tight core, because I think that the good thing was if you were building around like Tyreek Hill and Derrick Henry, two are guys we talked about on Thursday or Wednesday, I guess, you had more swipes at a good score because you could mess up other places, but if you had another lineup with those two paired together, you could still make up for it. So I think that whereas like if you spread things out, you may only have one lineup with those guys together. And I think that this is why it's valuable to keep things tight from a core perspective, settle on the plays you like most. The other thing that I thought was impactful on Sunday, at least for me, for DFS, was just, again, something we've talked about before, but like manually ranking players. Specifically, I hand-ranked the value plays, like the guys that popped up, like Brian Hill, Nyheim Hines, Jordan Wilkins, etc., and then hand-ranking the 8,000 range running back, which was Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, and Josh Jacobs. And digging in deeper to all those individual players really helped solidify for me, okay, I want to rank Henry highest of the 8,000 guys, Nyheim Hines highest of the value plays. I guess Kenyon Drake was up there too, all things considered. So I think that it was a good week for that. So I think it was a good week to just rethink like our process and be like, okay, the things we're doing are correct. We just need to make sure we don't talk ourselves out of that by the time we get to, Sunday or whatever.
Yeah, it's tough. We spend our weeks digging into the numbers, digging into everything and seeing what's out there. And then sometimes it feels like even though, by Thursday we have enough information where we're giving out, our favorite plays for the week. We're giving out some of the things we're targeting most, the game stacks, the trends. But sometimes by Sunday, it feels like all that's out the window because one player's out, like a Todd Gurley. And, you could have told me on Thursday Todd Gurley would be out, and I'd be like, no thanks, Brian Hill. But on Sunday, it's like, play some Brian Hill so I can do some different things. And, I personally need to do a better job of sticking to the research that I do before Sunday morning and not just pretending like Sunday is all that matters.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people will build ahead of time. I can't do that personally because I get like paralyzed in like, something will change before then, whether it be weather, injuries, stuff like that. So I can't build before Sunday morning. So like, I think that's a good thing to call out. Like redo your own research or at least have like notes for yourself. Okay, Here are the key points, stuff like that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, because I would have, had I just started building lineups maybe on Thursday without like that, night game, I would have made sure I had because Derrick Henry was a player pick for me. So was Tyreek Hill. I said, if you're playing from the angle, I specifically said this too. I was like, if you're playing from the angle that Dalvin Cook doesn't break the slate, who has the potential to do that? Those are two of the like 3 or 4 guys I named. That's what happened, but right. I wasn't heavy enough because I was sort of chasing everything. Because, believe it or not, on like Friday, Saturday, I wasn't that tuned into the news. So you come around Sunday morning, that's what we warned people about too, is,
right.
Stay.
Well, this is also an exceptional week given Jonathan Taylor got COVID, the close contact. Todd Gurley being out. There was a lot of news that broke. Adam Thielen being out, like that downgraded Dalvin Cook. We knew that was a possibility, but it didn't seem like it was the most likely scenario on Wednesday. So, like, there was a lot of stuff that happened, and it definitely does require you to be nimble. So I think, again, staying up on top of late-breaking news, making sure you are flexible based on things that occur, and like Brandon said, going through back what you thought earlier in the week to make sure you're not overthinking things when it comes to lineup building. Let's dive in here to the Thanksgiving games first, starting off with Houston at Detroit. And it was a good day to be heavy on Deshaun Watson and Will Fuller. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about before. We're like, you want to build around a core. If your core was Deshaun Watson, Will Fuller, and Antonio Gibson, you had a very good Thanksgiving, regardless of whether or not you had other pieces. So what'd you see in this first game here with Matt Patricia now out the door for Detroit?
Yeah, that's definitely a relevant piece to this, but I'm going to start here with the winning team with the Texans. Deshaun Watson, just 25 pass attempts with 318 yards and 4 touchdowns. Also ran 8 times for 24 yards. We talked about him in detail leading in to that slate, but he's been good on the full season. He's been particularly good in positive spots, which sounds obvious, but not every quarterback comes through in good situations. Some guys kind of play down to the competition, but Watson's, had a really tough start to the season with his opponents, but has been very, very good ever since. Will Fuller was featured with 7 targets to lead the team, had 171 yards, 2 touchdowns. Brandon Cooks had 5 targets. Duke Johnson had 4, including 43 yards and a touchdown. This team's passing game is pretty easy to figure out, especially with Randall Cobb injured. Fuller is the 1, Brandon Cooks is the 2. It was closer to 1A, 1B a little bit, with Fuller being the 1A leading into this game. But we know, and we talk about this every time we talk about this team, it's Fuller's ceiling, that potential that puts him higher, even with the salary discrepancy baked in. If you look at the market shares the past 2 games without Randall Cobb, Fuller's at 24% of the targets, with 2.5 downfield targets per game, 7.5 overall targets per game. Brandon Cooks is down to 16% of the targets with just 5 per game. But again, kind of a low volume day here on Thanksgiving for them. Duke Johnson has 15% of the targets. Jordan Akins is at 13% and Kiki Cutie is at 11%. So I think Fuller has kind of re-separated himself here a little bit, but I'm not totally down on Brandon Cooks for a small dip in his target share. Still get some downfield work, still some red zone work. And honestly, this team is Watson, Fuller, and Cooks. We like Jordan Akins well enough, but he's just a tight end who kind of hoping for something, hoping for a touchdown. In the backfield, Duke Johnson did lose some high leverage work to CJ Prosise, including a red zone touchdown through the air, but he played 75% of the snaps. Prosise was at 18%. This was a great offensive showing for the Texans, and Duke Johnson had 9 rushing attempts and 4 targets, which is 17 adjusted opportunities, which is carries plus 2x targets. Because on FanDuel, a target is worth, generally on average, twice as much as a carry for a running back. Had 80 yards and a score. I mean, again, this was a great game for this offense, but Duke Johnson just didn't really do enough. So there's no risk in fading him. They host the Colts in Week 13. The Lions once again struggled without Kenny Golladay and DeAndre Swift, which was pretty much to be expected, even with a poor defense on the other side. Matthew Stafford threw 42 times, just 1 touchdown, was 1 for 6 on his downfield attempts. And in this game, which is kind of what we expected, only 2 pass catchers were actually relevant. Marvin Jones had 12 targets. TJ Hawkinson had 8. Nobody else had more than 4, but 4 other Lions had 4 targets. If you look at this team in games without Kenny Golladay, the efficiency is really low, but I think Marvin Jones is still somewhat viable. He has a 20% target share, 10.2-yard average depth of targets, 5 touchdowns. TJ Hawkinson's at 17% of the targets, but just a 6.3-yard ADOT, 2 touchdowns for him, but they're the clear focal points. And then the backfield, even without DeAndre Swift, was fairly evenly split. Adrian Peterson, between Adrian Peterson and Kerryon Johnson. Peterson got bailed out, I want to say, by his 2 touchdowns, but had 55 yards on 15 carries. No targets. Kerryon had 4 targets and 11 carries for 98 total yards. Kerryon played 48% of the snaps. Peterson was at 27%. So I would assume DeAndre Swift is back for next week's game against Chicago, but if not, I still would prefer Kerryon Johnson for the receiving and some semblance of rushing efficiency.
Yeah, and I think that the hope here would be that Swift goes back into his pre-injury role, given that Matt Patricia's out the door. I don't know, what the coaching staff from a loyalty perspective does, because you'll sometimes see like new interim coaches have some sort of loyalty to the outgoing head coach. If that's the case, we'll probably see things be pretty status quo with Detroit. Are you changing anything the way you view them based on Patricia's firing or no?
It has less to do with the firing and more about if DeAndre Swift is back and or Kenny Golladay are back, because if they're not, this is not a great offense because the efficiency is just kind of capped. But if they're back, I think that we play Kenny Golladay, we play DeAndre Swift, and don't really play anybody else. So that's where I am.
I think that's the right way to view things. So pretty much status quo there, but we'll see for sure. Hopefully Swift and Golladay are back. And hopefully Will Fuller is on the main slate every week for the rest of the year. It was a tight FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League this week, and Henry De Los Reyes, 87, took it down to by 0.8 points to get the win. They won by 0.8 points. They had Patrick Mahomes stacked with Tyreek Hill. Justin Jefferson moved the needle in a big way, and Austin Eckler helped them put them over the top. The Week 13 contest should be posted soon. As always, be a $5 entry with 3 entries max. There is no rake, so FanDuel makes nothing off of this contest. All the entry fees go right back to you, the listeners. To enter, once it is up, go to FanDuel.com/league/listener league. That's FanDuel.com/league/listener league. I'll also put a link in the Week 12 recap podcast post up on numberfire.com. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's move here to Washington at Dallas, which was the Antonio Gibson game we have been waiting for since week 1, and it really does change his outlook pretty dramatically for DFS because he played 65% of the snaps, which tied his career high, but more importantly, he had 20 carries and 7 targets. That is 34 adjusted opportunities, which again is carries plus 2x targets, as Brandon mentioned. His previous high was 23 adjusted opportunities, so up 11 from his previous high. And he already had a great red zone role. He has 31% of the team's red zone opportunities from week 2 on, so that was good. If you give him yardage on top of that, he's like a weapon. So I think we should buy high on Antonio Gibson, even while keeping in mind that the offense is not great. Now, next week is tough. They're facing Pittsburgh, but I think broadly, Antonio Gibson is someone we need to be in on. I'm going to ask you about him in just a second here. Outside of him, it was status quo for the rest of the team. Terry McLaurin had another 90-yard day with 9 targets. Logan Thomas got his customary 4 targets, though all 4 were in the red zone. He also had a pass attempt, and he played some Wildcat quarterback again. So we should move Gibson way up while keeping everyone else here neutral. The guy who goes down is J.D. McKissic, obviously, but it's a good day for Antonio Gibson. The Cowboys offense had both tackles leave almost right away, which was not ideal. Zach Martin is going to miss a few weeks, which is a big downgrade for the offense. I was willing to believe in this offense a bit with Martin and others being healthier, but Dalton behind a bad offensive line is not a thing I want to deal with all too often, unless they're facing a team that generates absolutely no pass rush. The one exception might be Amari Cooper. We talked in the podcast about how much better Dalton has been targeting Cooper than the others, and that continued here. All 3 of Cooper, Gallup, and Lamb had between 7 and 8 targets on Thursday. Amari had 112 yards and a touchdown. Gallup had 41 yards, and Lamb had 21. Gallup did have 3 red zone targets, so the yardage will naturally be a bit lower there, and we know his role is down the field. So Amari is in a tier of his own right now, I think, here. His salary does need to come down from where it was, but he would be the bring back option here if you're stacking a team facing Dallas. Then it'd be Gallup for me, followed by Lamb. They're just dart throws at this point, though. So, I don't even feel the need to really rank them because, they're nothing more than dart throws. And I think we need to avoid Ezekiel until further notice. He lost another fumble here somehow. His snap rate fell to 66%, just 10 carries and 3 targets. He's bad. This offense is bad. And his role might continue to get worse if he keeps on losing fumbles. So it's a hard pass on Zeke until something changes there. But I want to talk to you about Antonio Gibson. We do not have a main slate posted yet for week number 13, so we can't talk about name that salary, but let's play it anyway and just kind of see where you're at on Antonio Gibson. Let's disregard the matchup with the Steelers. Let's say neutral matchup for Antonio Gibson. What kind of salaried back do you think he is?
So I think one quick way for me to estimate where salary should be is look at snap rate and kind of just turn that right into salary. So if he's playing about 65% of the snaps, the 6,500 would be a starting point, but we also know that he is capable of getting targets, so that gets bumped up. He gets all that red zone work. So, again, not specifically for that matchup with the Steelers. I would put him somewhere around like the 73 range, just because I still think that there are some concerns. And if Washington were to fall behind, I think that there's still legitimate reasons to think that J.D. McKissic could eat into that workload. But overall, I think he's kind of like a low 7,000s guy for me, or I guess mid 7,000s guy for me.
I'm also in the mid 7,000s, but on the higher end, I had $7,600 in mind, and I would be open to higher than that. Like, if you told me he's $8,000, I would be surprised, and I would think, well, that's kind of surprising, but I wouldn't cross him off there because he actually has a ceiling to get 30 adjusted opportunities, which not a lot of guys do. So I think the comp I would give is like James Robinson-esque, like a little bit lower James Robinson, maybe. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, James Robinson's role has just been so good and so consistent, and I think the key difference between the two is, and maybe I'm just higher on J.D. McKissic, but if Jacksonville trails, I don't feel that bad about James Robinson. If Washington's down by like 10 early, I think that might be a little bit more problematic for Antonio Gibson.
I think the odds that Jacksonville's down by 10 are higher than the odds that Washington's down by 10, though, given.
Sure.
So I think that levels it out a bit at least. But I understand your reservation. We've only seen it for like a couple games for Gibson, so that makes sense. But because of the touches he gets, like where he gets them, I am okay with buying high on him. I think that's where I'm at. Let's move now to the Sunday slate, because again, no Thursday night game. We had Las Vegas against Atlanta, and we talked about being right on Tyreek Hill and Derrick Henry. We were not right on the Raiders offense. I had a lot of Nelson Aguilar. That did not pay off. I had Josh Jacobs in some Derrick Henry lineups. That did not go well. I think that was mainly, I didn't have a ton of Darren Waller because I didn't like this game as much with Julio being out, but like I had enough Nelson Aguilar and Josh Jacobs, but this game is not my favorite. So I'm going to let you talk about this one, and I'm just going to sit here in silence while you do so.
Yeah, I'll actually just start with the Raiders, even though they lost. We'll just kind of go straight from what you were saying. But, on the podcast last Wednesday, I was talking about how Derek Carr's efficiency is very good and how he basically only ever played like top 20 defenses this year, and he's facing the Falcons, who are the worst adjusted pass defense in football. Based on Number Fire's metrics, it just didn't work out. He had 215 yards and 34 attempts, lost 0.56 passing net expected points per drop back. League average is a positive 0.14, so he was just like not even close. That number was basically like Ryan Finley's number from last year, because that's what I was anticipating the Bengals to be dealing with. So that's just some context. To be fair,
the Bengals also did deal with that. Even if it wasn't Ryan Finley, they dealt with the same thing.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what happened. Again, Derek Carr was good against better opponents, was trending up with the offense being healthy, and I don't know. It happens. Hunter Renfrow also led with 9 targets, which is not what we were anticipating. Darren Waller had 7. Nelson Aguilar had 6. Henry Ruggs had 5. Again, it's just unexpected with Hunter Renfrow at the top there, at least for me. Since their Week 6 bye, Darren Waller leads the team with 25% of the targets. Nelson Aguilar is at 19% with a 14-yard average depth of target. It's 1.8 downfield targets per game for him. Hunter Renfrow is at 15% of the targets, which is probably at this point enough to lower me on Nelson Aguilar. And Darren Waller is such a weird play because there is volume, but he's not efficient, and that's a problem. So the salary is always high, and he's like the one tight end sometimes if Travis Kelce's not on the main slate, where you're like, he's the one guy who can kind of burn me, but the efficiency is not really there. So I think I'm kind of out on Darren Waller for the most part, unless the salary drops a lot. Josh Jacobs was a train wreck, 7 carries for 27 yards, 3 targets for 17 yards. But the Falcons are a good rush defense, just very beatable through the air. For someone in his salary tier, at least as what it was last week, I think it's a little high. He has enough flaws. He's not a big threat in the passing game. He's not a 0 in the passing game, obviously, with those 3 targets, for example. But he's not a priority there. Played 60% of the snaps. Devontae Booker played 35%. So, I mean, they're playing the Jets next week. Should be a bounce back spot. We can probably buy low on the Raiders, but it's going to be hard to go back there after what should have been this week. For the Falcons, I mean, they scored 43 points. They won by 37. Matt Ryan had 185 yards on 39 attempts. So he was bad, no matter how you look at the efficiency. Did feature Calvin Ridley, 9 targets, 4 in the red zone. Hayden Hurst had 8 targets of his own. Russell Gage and Ito Smith had 5 targets each, but then 6 other Falcons had targets. So, without Julio, the offense, they put up points. Good defensive showing, which definitely helped, pile up those points. But, I mean, if you look at the games for this team without Julio, it's really Calvin Ridley's offense. He has 24% of the targets, 42% of the air yards, 4 downfield targets per game, 1.2 in the red zone. That works out to 13 weighted targets per game. It's just an elite workload. And then behind that, there's not a whole lot. Russell Gage is second in market share at 15%. Hayden Hurst is at 13%, which, frankly, is not even that good for a tight end. It's fine, but if you take Julio out of this offense and you drop the efficiency, it's just Calvin Ridley for me, and even he gets lowered because the ceiling for the offense is just lower. And then with no Todd Gurley, Brian Hill became a popular enough value option. Had 13 carries, 55 yards, 1 empty target, played half the snaps. They won by a lot. It should have probably gone better for Brian Hill, but it did not. Ito Smith had 12 carries, 65 yards and a touchdown, 5 targets for him, just 10 yards on them, 36% snap rate. So, I mean, I think Hill was probably not a great process play because if Todd Gurley was salaried at 5,100, I probably wouldn't have been that interested anyway. So why I played Brian Hill, I don't know. But I think we've just kind of seen enough reason not to like any Falcons running backs at this point. That's my take.
I think that it was defensible to be in on Hill because if your assumption was he would be the featured back, then it would work.
Yeah.
But he wasn't. So, and that was within the range of outcomes, which is why he wasn't an 80% play. Instead, 30 or whatever. I guess I don't know where your exposure wound up, but that's where mine roughly was 30% or so.
Yeah.
Kind of trying to account for the possibility he would not be that. If you told me they'd score 40 points.
Right. And win by that much.
Pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, and it's still half the snaps. I mean, that's fine, especially for a value play. Not many backs play 75% of snaps at this point.
Right. So. And he'd played 42% of the snaps the week before. So and he had gotten targets and suddenly the targets weren't really there either. So
yeah.
I think that there were good arguments on both sides. I think that obviously we saw the reason that the fade Brian Hill argument would have been correct. And I think that if you did so, that was the right move. So kudos to you, but I still think it was at least defensible. I think that's where I'd be on that. And I think the disappointing thing here is we had talked about on Wednesday, I'm getting all mixed up with this.
Yeah.
How the Falcons offense maybe had sputtered in the games without Julio because they'd faced tough teams. This was not a tough team, and Matt Ryan's efficiency was still really bad. So, I kind of think that we need to create a list of dudes whose absence is detrimental to their team. Julio, Kenny Golladay is on that list. Terry McLaurin, if he were to miss time, that offense isn't good to begin with.
Chris Conley.
Clearly. They put up 25 points, which might be their season high. So let's not go too crazy with this. But I think just having a list of guys who are difference makers on their team and knowing who they are, that could be helpful. For sure.
Yeah, football is not basketball. You don't just take players out and say, someone's got to play the minutes. It doesn't work.
Right, exactly. So I think that's just make that list in your mind and adjust accordingly. Betting on the NFL is great. Betting on the NFL with FanDuel Sportsbook is even better. Right now, FanDuel Sportsbook is giving you a chance to bet on the NFL season with reduced risk with their exclusive same-game parlay insurance. Simply place a 3-leg or more parlay on any NFL game to be eligible for the offer and follow along as the game unfolds. If you don't win your bet, FanDuel will refund your bet up to $25 in site credit. What do you have to lose? Head to FanDuel Sportsbook and place your same game parlay today. Must be 21 plus and present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, West Virginia, Indiana, Colorado, Tennessee, or Iowa. Refund issued as a non-withdrawable site credit. Max refund $25. Terms apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. In Iowa, call 1-800-BETS-OFF. And in Tennessee, call the Tennessee Red Line. Let's move now to the Chargers at the Bills. And the Chargers, frankly, just blew this game. Like they had so many chances to do something and they did not. But the true headline here for us is that Austin Eckler's role is stupid good. He came back with 14 carries and 16 targets. 16 targets. He was Keenan Allen with 14 carries, effectively. That is 46 adjusted opportunities. Like, what on earth? I don't know if I've seen a 40 before. I think I have, but, like, it's been a while.
I think McCaffrey had a few.
Probably, because he had those, like, 12 target games where they're just selling out to get the records last year. But, like, that's unreal. Because of that, his floor is disgusting. So he does need touchdowns for a ceiling, though. And he did lose a goal line touchdown to Joshua Kelly. But Eckler still had 36% of the team's red zone opportunities, which is carries or targets. He had 2 rushes and 2 targets inside the 10. So, yeah, he's going to get vultured. It will happen. I will guarantee that he's going to lose a touchdown to whether it be Kelly, Balaj when he's back, Jermaine Pope. Someone will take a touchdown from him, Justin Herbert, but that does not mean he can't score touchdowns. He was a half a yard short on Sunday, so we finally have another featured back we can go to each and every week, and that's huge in an offense that is now led by a largely efficient Justin Herbert. So Austin Eckler, thank you. Obviously, with Eckler getting 16 targets, though, it'll negatively impact some others. Keenan Allen and Hunter Henry still had 10 targets, but that's because the Chargers threw 52 times. That means their shares were under 20%. Herbert also didn't throw deep as much as he did previously. So I would say this knocks everybody down a peg. Mike Williams becomes an even bigger dart throw. Hunter Henry is more mid 5,000s than high 5,000s. And Keenan Allen can still have a big game, but his cash game appeal did take a hit unless he gets a salary decrease. Like, Keenan can still do well. We just need the salary to come down for him to get there. So stock way up on Austin Eckler, stock down across the board for everyone else. Josh Allen had a weird day, and he did roll up his ankle. He played through it, so he was fine, but he finished with 0.10 passing net expected points per dropback. That's actually lower than what he had in previous games without John Brown. So they didn't run a ton of plays, which will make things look worse than they were. But I think we keep it the way we originally thought here, where we downgrade Josh Allen's floor without John Brown, but don't count out the ceiling. He can still have big games in tight games, but it's a little bit shakier when from a floor perspective for Josh Allen. The targets were a little weird here too. Stephon Diggs had 9 targets, but went for just 39 yards. Gabriel Davis had 79 yards and a touchdown, but that was on just 4 targets, including 1 on a trick play from Cole Beasley. Beasley himself had just 4 targets, so I'm going to keep Diggs the same here. However, I'm going to lower Beasley a bit. I think he can get to 100 yards because he's done it 3 times this year, but the floor for him is not as good as I thought it was. Davis is worth considering for game stacks because he's always on the field, but in the games with Brown out or limited, Davis has 4, 9, 1, 3, and 4 targets. There are just kind of too many paths to failure there for me to go beyond game stacks for Davis. So downgrade Cole Beasley, upgrade to Davis, but still not a guy I want to use a standalone play, and then keep Stephon Diggs status quo. Devin Singletary and Zach Moss actually found some success here, but it honestly does not matter. They're not in play for DFS. Singletary had 17 adjusted opportunities, and Moss had 13, so we can continue to ignore them on full slates. If it's a smaller slate, I think that they might have a primetime game. No, I lied. But if it's more of a smaller slate, I'd go Moss, but otherwise I'm not going there. But let's talk about Austin Eckler. Again, we don't have salaries up for the main slate yet, but name that salary for Austin Eckler based on what you saw here.
Yeah, I mean, if you give him that role, somewhere in like the 85 range, give or take. Right?
Higher. Go higher.
I mean, like, yeah, probably, but we know he's not going to get that level.
I don't care. We're not predicting what his salary will be. We're saying what it should be.
Okay, then 13.
13,000?
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
I
like
mean, like,
95 is kind of the number I had in mind.
if you give him this role, sure,
Yeah.
but we know it's not going to be. He had 46 adjusted opportunities. There were two other games this year where running backs had 40. One from Christian McCaffrey in Week 9. Probably couldn't guess the other. Joe Mixon back in Week 5, which feels like years ago at this point. But
He's
so
not going to have 40, but if he gets 30 every week and
so
he's
like 30 is like league leading.
yeah,
Basically.
and like that's worth $9,500 to me.
Yeah, sure. Especially in this offense. But
yeah.
There are still some touchdown issues, like you alluded to.
Sure. Yeah.
That's. I'll go 9K.
Okay, fair enough. They get New England next week. I'm going to have a poop ton of Austin Eckler.
They're just going to ruin that game.
A poop ton may not be enough. Like, I know the Patriots sink from a pace perspective, but don't care. Give me all the Austin Eckler. Let's move now to Tennessee at Indianapolis. Derrick Henry is awesome. I kind of wish he had done in the second half what he did in the first half, but hey, I can't complain too much. What did you see in this one here?
Yeah, so again, I mentioned on Wednesday's podcast that of all the backs on the slate other than Dalvin Cook, I thought Henry was the one who could really burn us, and he did if you did not roster him. It's not like this is not a spot where I'm patting myself on the back. It's just you have to step back and think realistically what's going to happen. Is Josh Jacobs going to put up this game? Not really. Is Nick Chubb possibly? I mean, he had a really good game himself, but he's still dealing with Kareem Hunt. Someone like Derrick Henry just has that ability. 178 yards, 3 touchdowns. He actually had 4 targets here, caught 2 of them for 7 yards. And also, I mean, he probably should have 5 targets on that swing pass touchdown that was ruled a rush. But if you give Derrick Henry targets, he's a very different player, and he's very scary. He has multiple targets in 3 straight games. I had a 5-target game in Week 6. So, again, like, this is something I need to really keep an eye on and see if it's a thing. And it's after Thanksgiving, so you really can't fade him anyway. So probably just play him regardless. But Ryan Tannehill was efficient with 10 yards per attempt on 22 attempts, just 1 touchdown, which was a 69-yarder to A.J. Brown. Brown led the team with 6 targets. Henry was actually second on the team with 4 targets. Corey Davis, Jeff Swaim had 3. If you look at this team since Week 7, with A.J. Brown and Corey Davis both healthy, their workloads are pretty close. A.J. Brown leads with 25% of the targets, which is only 6.8 per game. Davis is at 24% at 6.5 per game, but Davis actually has better like high leverage target numbers with the downfield and red zone work. But the point is really that they're very close. We've been saying this for weeks now. The salary should be closer than they probably are. You still prefer A.J. Brown if you can get there, but Corey Davis is he has a really good role right now. Jonnu Smith's at 4 targets per game in the span. That's 14% of the targets, but is very involved in the red zone, which keeps him relevant at tight end at least. And Ryan Tannehill in this split is a tinge above the NFL average in efficiency for what it's worth. Not amazing. They play Cleveland next week, so Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, kind of going to do like that Spider-Man meme maybe, but I think that Arrow's way up on Derrick Henry somehow. The Colts lost Anthony Costanzo, their tackle, to an MCL injury. He's going to have an MRI, so I don't have any more information. A lot of green for him on his Pro Football Focus page. I'm sure Jim has some takes on Costanzo, but
we can have takes. We can have takes, baby.
Yeah, so probably a big downgrade to this offense if he were to miss time. The Colts played this one without Jonathan Taylor, and they still spread the ball around for the most part. Nyheim Hines had 10 carries and 10 targets for 30 adjusted opportunities, had 95 yards. Jordan Wilkins, just 6 carries. But even the Colts, like even when there's no Taylor, they're still away because Jacoby Brissett ran for 2 touchdowns. So, I mean, this team they just are that team. Nyheim Hines played 65% of the snaps. Wilkins just 35%. So, if Taylor were somehow to miss again next week, Nyheim Hines would be very relevant, but I don't necessarily know if that's the case. Michael Pittman had 9 targets, which is a rare mark for a Colt this year because that was 21.4% of the team's targets. There are only 9 instances of a Colt getting better than a 20% target share in a single game. Nyheim Hines also got there this week. It is the third instance of this happening since week 5. Pittman did it in week 10. So you would think that things are good for Michael Pittman, but caught 2 of his targets for 28 yards. The market share is not that great. It's 16.6% since week 9. 6.8 targets per game. It's not enough. If your team leader's at rounding up 17% of the targets, you don't have the floor upside to be that relevant on a full slate. Phillip Rivers is above average in efficiency, which makes it enticing. But he has a 13.8% downfield rate. League average is around 17%. His ADOT 6.4 in this span. There's just not enough upside. It's so hard to predict who's going to score. Problem is they play the Texans next week, so I'm probably going to want to chase this offense a little bit again. I just don't think I can buy into Michael Pittman realistically.
Yeah, I mean, like, I understand not buying into him because, like, the floor is not there, but he has a path to a good game, which he has shown.
Yeah.
And, like, he's gotten volume at times. Like, if you look at the overall numbers, no. But, like, there have been games where he's had worthwhile volume. So I think that if we're talking bring back stacks, like if you go to Sean, Will Fuller, Pittman's a bring back option, I think that you're right to have pause beyond that, though.
Yeah.
What about Derrick Henry's salary? Because he was $8,300 for this week. Next week it's the Browns. Myles Garrett probably going to be back for that game, I would assume. He had symptoms from COVID, so maybe he won't be, but like hopefully he is, because like Myles Garrett's one of the more fun players in the NFL. But let's just ballpark a salary here for Derrick Henry. I think that like he gets a slight nudge up because of the targets, but he doesn't really need it, I guess, is the way that I'm viewing it. So like if Eckler in my mind is 95, Derrick Henry should be like 9,000. Maybe I should have them both at 9,000. Like it feels weird to have Eckler above Henry, given that Henry's ceiling realistically is better.
Yeah. I was going to say because I bumped Eckler up to like 9K, I think Henry should be around there.
Yeah.
I would imagine it might get up to like maybe even the upper 9s, but I don't think it's unrealistic. Just because we know he has such a role in the red zone, and if he gets anything out of the backfield, like I've always wondered why they didn't just try to throw him like 1 or 2 swing passes.
Maybe they will now. Like,
but like on that again, it was a rush, but on that pass,
Yeah.
like he just caught it and just barreled his way down the field.
right, because you get him against small people, and Derrick Henry against big people is scary. But Derrick Henry against small people, like it's not math. It's just Derrick Henry against puny humans. Like that's gonna go well for you.
Yeah, so I'm very high on Derrick Henry, and historically, I'm hesitant, but I think that it's a different look right now with the any semblance of targets.
I think the other thing too is that what's different from last year is that he was hovering around like 24-ish adjusted opportunities per game last year. He's consistently been in the upper 20s this year and sometimes gets to 30. And like that doesn't sound like a lot, but given how disgusting he is, every incremental bit matters.
Yeah,
and that is impactful.
And again, I've said this a few times, but there's not healthy Christian McCaffrey, Ezekiel Elliott in a great offense, Saquon Barkley. Like there are a few guys who can kind of do this at this point. He's one of them.
Yep, I agree. So we'll be having a lot of Austin Eckler and Derrick Henry next week, and probably some Nick Chubb as well in that same game. Let's move now to the Giants at the Bengals. Pretty bad game. Daniel Jones hurt his hamstring here and had to come out. Joe Judge said after the game he thought that Jones would be good to play next week. The sentiment this morning sounds less optimistic, and that's bad because they need him. Because I love to joke about Daniel Jones not being good and adoring sacks, but it would be a massive downgrade for them to have Colt McCoy at the helm. So hopefully Jones is good to go. I think we should plan as if he's not going to be, though, based on the way things sound as of right now. If he's good to go, though, Wayne Gallman's stock would be up. He had 24 carries. That was good. But he also had 5 targets. And that's 34 adjusted opportunities for Gallman. His previous season high was 22. So kind of like Gibson, I would not expect that number to be the new normal. But his appeal now is higher than it was before because that's in his range of outcomes. 5 targets, something he can do. I know he had like -3 yards, but like it still matters. So I would say stock up Wayne Gallman if Daniel Jones can go. It would also be big for Evan Engram if Jones can play because he had 9 targets, which is good. But the bigger thing is that he had 3 deep targets. He caught all three for 113 yards. He had 4 deep targets the entire season entering this game. So I was out on Ingram because they were using him like Jason Witten before, but now they're using him more creatively, so I'm in. Sterling Shepard, 8 targets. Golden Tate had 9, but neither guy racked up yardage. Shepard has 3 deep targets since his return, so I'm not going to use him unless it's a wild, fun game to stack, because I don't think he can burn me for not using him. Like, he kind of, I guess, has a floor, but like, I don't think there's a ceiling. Ingram is a standalone play now, which is great if Jones plays. If Jones does not play, it's a major downgrade to this offense. So hopefully Danny Dimes, good to go. On the other side, Brandon Allen was predictably terrible in his first game filling in for Joe Burrow. He had negative 15.72 passing net expected points, so he was basically Ryan Finley. I'm not going to use any players in this offense in DFS, so there's no point in recapping the rest of the team. Like, sure, Gio Bernardo's on the field. I don't care. T. Higgins got a touchdown. Good for him. I love T. Higgins. Actually good for him, but I'm not going to use him. It also lowers their opponents because they're not going to be able to make things shoot out. So I would say it's stock down for the Bengals, obviously. And I would say if Daniel Jones can't go, it's stock down for the Giants as well. Any thoughts for you on Wayne Gallman? Let's just pretend for a second that Jones is healthy. Like, would you be into Wayne Gallman, or do you still need to see more from him?
I don't actually know what the slate looks like because it's not posted yet, and I just don't have the other games pulled up to figure it out. But, with Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, I'm sure a few others on the main slate, he might be a rotational piece just so that I can get like 2 of the backs and still have some flexibility. So I'm fairly high on Gallman, but I would really need Daniel Jones to play.
Yeah, they're 8.5-point underdogs against Seattle. That might move if Jones is officially ruled out. Like 8.5 seems like a lot if Jones is healthy, but that's not ideal. That would also probably lead to more Dion Lewis in that game script. So I think that's a reason to be concerned. Let's move now to Arizona at New England. Kyler Murray still did not seem right, and Cam Newton didn't seem right either. So kind of a dud of a game outside of our boy Kenyon Drake coming through. What'd you see here?
Yeah, I talked about the Patriots' offensive efficiency on Wednesday's pod. I thought they were good enough to keep this game close, which they did, but it just didn't really matter. There were 37 total points, 20-17 win for the Patriots. Cam Newton had just 84 yards and 18 attempts, no touchdowns, 2 picks, lost 0.43 passing and expected points were dropped back. 40% success rate, so just a terrible showing. And honestly, this is just a terrible DFS offense, even with some glimpses of hope in pace and efficiency and some market shares the past few weeks. Only 4 Patriots had a target. Damiere Byrd led with 7. Jacoby Myers had 6. Since N'Keal Harry's return in Week 10, Myers leads with 22% of the targets, which is only 5.3 per game. Bird's at 19%, including a game with 0 targets. James White has 17%. Harry has 15%. There's just really nothing whenever, 22% of the targets is fine, but you have to adjust that sometimes for the passing volume. Sometimes market shares mean more. Sometimes the actual volume itself means the most, and I think that's the case here. There's not enough passing volume, especially with Harry back now. So Jacoby Myers doesn't really have that role that he had for a few weeks leading in. Damian Harris got featured a little bit with 14 carries, 47 yards in the receiving work. Cam Newton had 9 carries. James White had 5. Honestly, I can't envision a scenario where I will be higher on the Patriots than I was for a pace-up spot against the Cardinals. They probably will ruin the Chargers next week, so I feel like we'll probably dig into them again and see if they can keep it close to some degree, but I'm very much out on the Patriots overall. Kyler Murray was not...
I think the way you viewed that was right with the Patriots, like saying this is the best spot they'll have the rest of the year. If you don't come through in plus spots, that is really damaging. Like, I think it's... I don't know if it's like that's just something to have in your mind. Like, have an idea of like when teams fail to meet expectations. That's how you can tell which teams you should be buying into. Patriots did not do that. So I think that the way you phrased that was good.
Yeah, it's really problematic whenever you can't count on them in what could or what should have been a good spot. Now, maybe part of it was that the Cardinals weren't really great. Again, the Patriots, our defense is not what it has been, but Kyler Murray wasn't quite himself. He's had that AC joint issue last week in his starting shoulder. Had just 170 yards and 34 attempts with no touchdowns. they threw or they dropped back 36 times and ran 34 times, so a pretty even split. DeAndre Hopkins carved out 7 targets for 55 yards, actually breaking the streak of alternating 100-yard games. So take that for data. But he was the only Cardinal with more than 33 receiving yards. There was no Larry Fitzgerald, and Fitzgerald's actually kind of involved in this passing offense. He was on the COVID list, but either way, I don't think there's enough here to change the way that we view the Cardinals. Christian Kirk and Andy Isabella had 6 targets. Chase Edmonds had 5. Kenyon Drake had 4. I don't think I can go hard at Isabella, even if Fitzgerald were to miss more time, because there's still DeAndre Hopkins and Christian Kirk. Andy Isabella is an amazing athlete. A lot of people on Twitter love Andy Isabella. I'm included in that, but being realistic, he's still going to be the wide receiver 3 at best. So
I think if it were Andy Isabella with a healthy Kyler, it'd be a different discussion, but he's pretty clearly not healthy right now.
Yeah, sure. There's that. I'm trying not to play too many wide receiver 3s when I can't avoid it, unless I really have to, and the salary's right. So, Kyler ran 5 times for 31 yards, but I don't think his arm is quite right. So I don't know how we're going to view this offense next week when they play the Rams, but I will be down on them. I will have to take a long, hard look at Kenyon Drake, who again had 4 targets, which is awesome. He had a season-high 5 targets last week after never getting more than 2 before that. He had 22 carries for 78 yards, 2 touchdowns on a week best 9 red zone carries as well. He did play only 55% of the snaps. Chase Edmonds was at 45% according to NFL.com. It was 54-50 in favor of Edmonds last week. So the workload was amazing for Drake. He burned a lot of us early on in the season. The role's a little bit different right now. There are targets. There's definitely elevated carries, a better red zone role than what he had early on in the year. I think the arrow's up on him, but looking at the snap rate, at least, you have to somewhat temper expectations. At least that's the way that I would view it. Again, they play the Rams next week, so I don't know how that's going to go for this offense.
I think that the red zone role is really good and it's impactful. Sure. I did not look at the numbers, including yesterday, but if you look at him for the full season in games he has finished, I think he had 36% of the team's carries or targets in the red zone for the full season in full games. It's a really good number. Like, I was gushing over Antonio Gibson, who had 31%, and Drake's at 36%. That's like Josh Jacobs' level of involvement. Derrick Henry's like 43%. So
wasn't Chase Edmonds always coming in the red zone early on?
Comes in on third down. I don't know about the red zone, but like Kenyon Drake gets the ball.
Yeah, he gets a lot of carries, but just didn't always convert on them.
He did on Sunday.
He did on Sunday, yes.
We'll definitely take that. And I think that I agree with you where the arrow is up. I think that we're kind of seeing – and, like, he's also gotten good yardage this year, even when you account for the fact he doesn't get receiving yardage. Like, his yardage numbers are pretty good relative to a lot of lower salary backs. So I would agree that the arrow is up on him. But I am worried about this offense. I think that, like, given what we saw in the second half of that Seattle game after Kyler initially got hurt, given the practice reports last week, given what we saw in this game, I kind of am like, if you had given me Rams Cardinals 2 weeks ago, I would have been like, cool, I'm stacking that game. I'm going to have a lot of Kyler. I'm going to run it back with Bobby Trees or Cooper Kupp or Josh Reynolds. Now I don't know. It's tough with Kyler's shoulder. Like, I think that's actually a legit thing to be worried about.
Yeah, 13% downfield rate the past 2 weeks. In this week, 15% this week, but the efficiency was just terrible. So,
yeah, I'm worried. I think that's where I'm at right now. Let's move to Carolina and Minnesota, which is a pretty messy game. But Kirk Cousins led a comeback here for the Vikings. He had 0.21 passing net expected points per dropback, even with no Adam Thielen. And Thielen might be able to return this week, but that was at least reassuring to see them not fall totally flat without Thielen. Because I kind of had that in my head as like a range of outcome possibility where they could fall totally flat with no Thielen. And they didn't. So kudos to them for that, and kudos to Cousins for that. That did not prevent Dalvin Cook from flopping. He got banged up with a turned ankle, though he was able to return. He had 18 carries and 4 targets, just didn't get the usual yardage, and he didn't score. Also lost a fumble, which hurt there. So Dalvin is still worth a lofty salary, but I'm still of the belief that he does deserve a downgrade when Thielen is out because it's not as good of an offense. Like, it was still fine, and that's good, but it's not as good, and that's impactful. So, slight downgrade for Dalvin if Thielen misses more time, but if he's back next week, I think we can be in on Dalvin Cook once again. Justin Jefferson, even with the offense getting bumped down, does go up with Thielen being out. He had 13 targets. 3 of those were deep. He also had 4 red zone targets. So Thielen being out may have had the biggest impact in the red zone because Thielen just gets disgusting red zone chances. So Jefferson is a cash game option when Thielen is out. Hopefully Thielen is back next week, though, because just, again, this offense is better. The other benefactor was Kyle Rudolph. He had 8 targets with 1 deep and 1 in the red zone. Rudolph has 13 targets in 2 games with no Irv Smith. He's at least in play if Irv misses another game. His target projection would go down if Thielen can't go, or if Thielen can go, but it would lead to increased touchdown odds, so I would actually be okay bumping up Rudolph if Thielen plays, despite bumping down his projected target share. On the Panthers side, Teddy Bridgewater looks like he'll be okay. He got hurt late, but he said he's fine. DJ Moore hurt his ankle late in the game. I've not seen a full update on that yet, but it didn't look good. It would downgrade the offense if Moore were to miss time because he's very good. He's a very good football player. And I'm not sure if he's like in the Julio zone, but it's enough where I would downgrade the offense a non-negligible amount if Moore misses time. But we weren't really using the quarterback here anyway, and that's the biggest loser in the situation, and it will give more volume to others. Robbie Anderson probably doesn't have a ton of upward mobility. His target share is already 26%, but Curtis Samuel does. He has 21% of the targets since returning from his injury. He would likely get some more downfield shots because Moore was their big deep threat. His red zone role would probably remain the same. So I'm always into Robbie. But if Moore misses time, I would be super into Curtis Samuel just because I think the ceiling is there. The floor would go up, and the floor is also not that bad already. So I think Samuel would be deserving of a bump up if DJ Moore misses time. Mike Davis's role did rebound, though probably won't matter because Christian McCaffrey's probably going to be back after the bye. But Davis, 15 carries and 6 targets. That is 27 adjusted opportunities. That's his highest in months. I think since like week 4 or 5, I believe. But McCaffrey's back after the bye, so good for Davis if McCaffrey misses more time, but that is about it. Brandon, I want to talk to you about this Panthers offense. Assuming that DJ Moore misses time, I said tiny smidge up for Robbie Anderson, but mostly up for Curtis Samuel. Any disagreements for you there?
No, I think that's the right take, and I would actually be higher on Samuel. We like him. We've liked him for a while. The salary was low, so we'll have to see where that kind of goes if no DJ Moore. But having 3 viable receivers whenever the offense isn't incredible, it's always a little bit difficult. But if you give me 2 in an offense that's still viable, that's a lot more appealing. So I would put my personal stock in Curtis Samuel higher. Same with Robbie. It would be easier to trust the targets and really not have DJ Moore in there to skew things. But I mean, like you said, I don't think losing DJ Moore ruins this offense. It's a bit of a downgrade, but Robbie Anderson's still very good. Curtis Samuel's still very good. And if Christian McCaffrey's back, defenses still have players to worry about.
If only Brandon Zylstra could have played more in this game. I don't even know if he's on the roster anymore, but he's a Minnesota guy. Could have gotten him in there for the return to Minnesota, but alas, maybe another time for Brandon Zylstra. Let's move to the Dolphins at the Jets. No Tua here because he had inflammation in his hand. It sounds like he may miss more time. Brian Flores said after the game that Tua is a starter if healthy. Ryan Fitzpatrick may get to start beyond this week. So what'd you see in this game, which is kind of a dud, just boring game?
Yeah, not a whole lot of highlights from this game on Red Zone throughout the day.
Not on the Jets side, that's for sure.
20-3 win for the Dolphins. As you mentioned, Ryan Fitzpatrick was a quarterback. He threw 39 times for 257 yards, 2 touchdowns, was sacked 4 times. The best part, and I mentioned this, I kind of like this offense more for I love Tua, but I like this offense more for Ryan Fitzpatrick is under center because they just throw the ball more. He force-fed Devontae Parker 14 targets, which was 36%. Parker had 119 yards on them. Nobody else had more than 5 targets. That was Mike Gesicki and DeAndre Washington. It's kind of tough to pinpoint the team's most relevant sample for their target shares because of the quarterbacks being different, but also since week 9 when Preston Williams got hurt. But if we look at week 9 since Williams got hurt, Parker has 29% of the targets. That includes 2 downfield, 1 red zone per game. If you weight those, it's 11.4 targets, which is pretty elite. What I mean by weighted targets is effectively the workload he gets is equal to 11.4 targets per game, which is awesome. Gesicki's at 15% of the targets in this sample with an 11.5 yard average target depth, which is great for a tight end. Jakeem Grant's at 14% with an 11.9 yard average depth of target. So I know Gesicki burns us a lot, but so do a lot of tight ends. I still think he's a potential target because it's tight end. And with that ADOT, there's some yardage upside at least, and that kind of gives him a little bit more of a floor than some of these guys who are just touchdown dependent. But really, Devontae Parker's the guy. Even with league average efficiency in the stretch, he's been producing because the volume's so good. And if Ryan Fitzpatrick is back there, I like Parker more just from a pass volume standpoint. DeAndre Washington actually led the backfield in carries with no Savon Ahmed. He had 13 carries and 6 of 7 carries in the red zone, 5 targets. Matt Breida had 8 carries and 2 targets. The snap rate's still just 48% for Washington, 32% for Breida. The first half opportunities were actually 3 carries and 2 targets apiece for them. So it looks like Washington's the guy, but it's not really the same situation that we've had with Myles Gaskin and Savon Ahmed as lead backs in this offense. So I wouldn't treat him as the new Ahmed or Gaskin. So just take that for what it's worth. They play Cincinnati next week, and what I'm assuming would be positive game script. So that's at least a little bit intriguing. Sam
Let's just
Darnold.
get Myles Gaskin back. Myles Gaskin back for Dynasty shares. Woo!
Yeah. Sam Darnold dropped back 30 times, had 197 yards, no touchdowns with 2 picks. Did throw deep 10 times, which keeps the receivers in the territory of consideration, at least for bringbacks. I think the Jets are just bringback only. If you're not stacking the game, it's a little harder to justify. But with Jamison Crowder, Denzel Mims, and Brashad Perriman, these guys get volume, specifically Mims and Perriman, actually. Crowder had 5 targets this week. Perriman and Mims had 8. Perriman had 5 downfield targets. Mims had 3. Perriman, 79 yards, Mims 67. So, there's some yardage potential here because of the downfield work, but touchdown opportunities are still scarce in this offense. If you look at the 3 games with all 3 of these receivers healthy, Mims leads with 29% of the targets, 145 air yards per game on the strength of 4 downfield targets per game. It's 11.2 weighted targets, very similar to Devontae Parker. Perriman's at 23% of the targets, 3.7 downfield per game, 9.5 weighted targets. Crowder's a bit more of an afterthought with just 12% of the targets. Not a whole lot of downfield work and red zone work. He's got 2 each of those over these 3 games. So, again, bringbacks for Mims and Crowder are appealing. Again, they play the Raiders, so the Raiders should fare better than they did this week against the Jets. So there's at least that.
Yeah, and I think that's also a much better matchup for the Jets than the Dolphins are, because the Dolphins are among the best defenses in football. I know that if you look at success rate numbers, they're not, but they generate big plays defensively. So I think that this is a better spot for the Jets. I'm willing to use Denzel Mims there. Name that salary for Mims based on what you see in the past 3 games.
He should you got to factor in the offense still, but I think 59-ish is fair.
I thought 58. So yeah, we're in the same range. Kind of a Corey Davis-esque player from an expectation once you adjust for the market shares and the offense. I'd rather have Davis.
Yeah.
But kind of similar there. Sure. So Denzel Mims stock continuing to solidify rather than be up. I think it's just solidifying that his stock is good. Yeah. Let's move now to Cleveland at Jacksonville. The Jags were missing half their roster and they actually put up a good effort here. So kudos to them on that. But the Browns' main guys came through. Nick Chubb went off for 144 yards and a touchdown on 19 carries. He also had 3 targets for 32 yards. That is his first time with multiple targets for the season. He played 61% of the snaps. That's his second highest rate of the year. Chubb ran around on 16 of 33 pass plays. That's also higher than usual. So there were a lot of pluses here. I am going to nudge Chubb a bit higher, though. I'm not going to go overboard here because it could just be variance. And also Kareem Hunt still gets red zone work. So there are still downsides for Nick Chubb. but I am bumping him up from where I was previously. The other guy here was Jarvis Landry. This was the first time they played a non-weather game since Odell Beckham got hurt, which seems like it was a decade ago. And Landry went off. He had 11 targets for 143 yards and a touchdown. 2 of those were deep. 3 of those were in the red zone. Nobody else had more than 3 targets. So teams are going to put a heavy emphasis on stopping Jarvis Landry, and that's one potential pitfall. But Jarv has showed that, or has now shown, I guess, that he has both a floor and a ceiling, which is awesome to see. In 3 games with Austin Hooper being back, Rashard Higgins is second on the team with a 16% target share. Hooper has 14%. That's tough on a low volume passing offense, even for a tight end. So I've used Hooper, and I did use him Sunday, and he did score, but I think we need to look for better options. It's basically just Chubb and Landry on this team right now. But Chubb is very good. Landry is pretty good. Mike Lennon played well here. He actually had 0.23 passing net expected points per dropback. He said that, I don't know if I'll ever start a game again, so I'm just going to chuck it, and he did. So kudos to you, Mike Lennon. That's actually really cool. They didn't have DJ Chark or Chris Conley, and I think that that's reassuring for this offense when Gardner Minshew comes back, which might be this week. So I don't know. I was impressed with the Jags, so good for them. That's a good thing for James Robinson, especially, who continues to have one of the best roles in the league. He had 22 carries and 6 targets. He is also good enough to convert on the volume that he does get. So Robinson continues to be a worthwhile target in the 7,000 range, and I think, again, you can justify it if he's in the low 8,000s, despite being in a bad offense. The target numbers here will be fluky because Chark and Conley were out, but Colin Johnson popped up. He had 8 targets with 3 deep and 1 in the red zone. They're a bad team, for the whole, but he's a rookie, and he has an insane catch radius. So I wouldn't be shocked if they try to keep him involved. The problem is, they've got Chark and Laviska Shenault, who are long-term options. They need to bump Keelan Cole effectively to get Colin Johnson additional runs. So I'm not using him when Chark is back, but I'm at least monitoring Colin Johnson when Chark does come back to see what his role looks like. I think he's worth that, just because, if you watched him when he was healthy at times in Texas, he had some fun games for college DFS where it's legal. So, keep an eye on that for Colin Johnson as well. I want to talk to you about Nick Chubb, though, Brandon. Where are you at on him based on what you saw here? I said stock up, but still some red flags. Not enough to bump me off by any means. Where do you set on Nick Chubb?
Yeah, I think the least bit higher that I could possibly be, because Nick Chubb is always someone that you have to be a little bit high on because he can get 25 carries in a game, and he's good enough to break runs. Running the ball is not as important as passing the ball, but it's not that running backs don't matter. It's just that running backs don't matter as much. Yeah. Nick Chubb is one of the backs who can matter because he can sort of make his own plays. So whenever you give me someone like that to choose from, and he can get a floor of 18 carries, that's relevant for sure. The issues are what you pointed out with Kareem Hunt still being involved. Not a whole lot of receiving, and I don't think that either of us would feel great that he keeps that receiving role moving forward, just because that has not been what he's done. So I think the arrow's up a tad, but I was already kind of high on him to begin with.
Yeah, I think there is a chance that he keeps it just because he's playing out of his mind right now, and the Browns may be okay, we're just gonna let's go Derrick Henry on this bit and up his usage. But
no Odell Beckham,
sure,
at some point they got to throw the ball a little bit more.
Sure,
just to different guys. So maybe that's a result of this as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So slight upgrade to Nick Chubb, but still some red flags, specifically with Kareem Hunt being involved in the passing game in the red zone. Let's move now to New Orleans at Denver. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I feel really bad for the way this game played out. It's just poor Kendall Hinton, man. I know that they dapped him up in the locker room afterwards, and I'm glad they did because he deserves that. Give him the game ball, let him keep that ball forever, and keep him on the active roster to get him a good pay for a couple weeks, just because I think that he deserves that after this week.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to say about this game. It's probably one of the easier games I've ever recapped. The Saints won 31-6, had 78 passing yards and 16 attempts. They ran 44 times. 19 of the carries went to Latavius Murray, who had 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara had 11 for 54, 2 targets for a -2 yards. So he now has -2 yards from Taysom Hill through 2 games on 3 targets. Taysom Hill ran 10 times again for 44 yards, 2 touchdowns, similar to last week. I'm not chasing the Latavius Murray game. He did have 9 first-half carries, though, to Alvin Kamara's 8. I think Alvin Kamara is just toast with Taysom Hill under center. We kind of were at that conclusion last week. He's going to lose a lot of goal line work. He's not getting passing volume. That's really what makes him the most valuable. So I think that's kind of what this is. And I think the Taysom Hill situation is like J.J. Zacharyson put it, like a Tim Tebow-esque situation where he'll have a floor and some ceiling because of the rushing, but just not a whole lot of passing. The silver lining here is, I guess, if Taysom Hill is Tim Tebow, that would make Michael Thomas the Demaryius Thomas. 6 of the 16 targets, at least. It's noteworthy from like a market share standpoint. Now through 2 games with Taysom Hill at quarterback, Michael Thomas has 47% of the targets, which is actually 8.5 per game, 1.5 downfield per game, 2 red zone per game. It's a solid role, but it's just modest efficiency from Hill. He's been close to league average, but not quite. Just an 11% downfield rate, 5.3 yard average target depth. Manny Sanders has 14% of the targets in this span. Kamara's at 8%, and their pass rate's at 39%. So just a destroyer for this offense. They play the Falcons next week. I really think Taysom Hill is the only one I'm interested in, unless you want to play the game stack angle with Michael Thomas, but I can't get on Kamara. And then for the Broncos, I think this is just a complete just gloss over. They had more interceptions with 2 than they had completions on 9 pass attempts. I don't know how you don't get Kendall Hinton like a swing pass or anything.
Right.
Get something. I don't know. Like, I'm not a coach. I'm sitting here for a reason, but if you can't scheme up a completion, more than one completion in a game, I could probably, maybe I could complete 2 passes if you gave me.
Nah, I couldn't. No, I'd spike in the ground every time. I don't want any part of this.
Give me like a jet sweep, and I'll just.
Like one of the tap passes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Something
like that.
Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah.
But yeah, don't let your quarterback, your receiver, your practice squad receiver, leave the game with 1 completion. I don't know. And you can't even look at the market shares here, even the running backs. There's just nothing here. They play the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football next week, so someone like Jerry Jeudy will be back on that radar.
Yeah.
But you can't learn anything from this game.
No, you cannot. With the Saints side of things,
Philip Lindsay did hurt his knee, so keep that in mind. But that's about it.
Yeah, that could be interesting. But I think with the Kamara thing, his role in the 2 games with Taysom Hill is that of a running back with a $6,400 salary. Is that outrageous?
I mean, is it even that good?
No, that's a fair question. No, you're right. You're right.
There's no receiving.
Yeah.
Very little red zone work. I don't know how you justify playing.
I can't personally right now. So, Drew Brees, I may have taken you for granted at times. Rest up, bud. Get back soon. Let's move now to Kansas City at Tampa Bay. This game looked over right away, but the Bucs did charge back. To their credit, they actually covered. If it was 3.5, wherever you got it. But the reason it looked over is Tyreek Hill is disgusting. He turned 15 targets into 269 yards and 3 touchdowns. My goodness, there aren't many receivers in the league who have that upside. There might not be any outside of Devontae Adams, and I'm not even sure that he can get to 269. So that's big. And he got those 15 targets with Sammy Watkins back. So he is just locked in right now. Hill has 14 plus targets in 3 straight games for the fastest receiver in football, for the best quarterback in football. That should not happen. If you look at the games with Watkins playing, it's a 23% target share with Hill, but with a ton of deep targets. So he's the 1 wide receiver in Devontae Adams tier right now. And if you said you put Tyreek Hill above Devontae Adams, I can't really push back against that. That's just kind of where he's at right now. That's not to speak ill of Travis Kelce. He had 8 targets here. That puts his target share to 21% in the games with Watkins. Watkins at 18%, though he doesn't get any high leverage looks. So I had said before that Kelsey had the higher median outcome, whereas Hill had the higher ceiling. I think we may need to amend that with Tyreek getting the target volume that he's getting, where even the median outcome for Tyreek Hill is better than Travis Kelsey. So we can obviously still go with Kelsey. Like, Kelsey's amazing too, but Hill is like a different kind of force. And I think that is it's hard to put into words how good of a DFS piece he is. Watkins works for game stacks. He has at least 7 targets in 4 of his 5 full games, so I can get there, but like, my goodness, Tyreek Hill. Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Le'Veon Bell continue to split work. CEH had 11 carries and 1 target. Le'Veon had 5 and 2. I am not touching that, even on a good offense, so we will spend no more words on that. The Bucs offense eventually got going, which was good. Tom Brady finished with 345 yards on 41 attempts. He did throw 2 picks, but that's kind of a product of a vertical passing offense. That's going to happen. Brady has shown upside plenty this year, and they've faced tough defenses. So I hope people get off this passing game, because I'm definitely not off of it. I often get annoyed with Twitter in high-profile games. They will like overreact to bad passes.
No.
I think people are going to write off Tom Brady because he's had some bad passes, but I haven't, like, if you look at the whole body of work, I haven't seen it be that bad. Like, someone compared him to late career Peyton Manning, and like, I don't see the same thing that you're seeing, I guess. I think that he's better than that. I don't know. Whatever.
I think
Go ahead.
people like to overreact and be irrational in prime time.
I don't know. Interestingly, it's possible Antonio Brown took more of a backseat here. He had 3 targets, but he also ran 7 fewer routes than Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. They both had 9 targets. Rob Gronkowski was third with 7, and Cameron Brate had 6. So it seems like they ran more 2 tight end sets than previously, and Brown was the guy who got the squeeze there. And that's easily enough for me to push Brown down on the list. I'm still going to rank Evans highest because of his touchdown equity being so good, and he hauled in a long ball. I know Tom Brady is incapable of completing deep passes, I was told, but he did for a touchdown. So I'd put Evans first. Godwin is a really solid second. Gronk might actually be third too, because of the position he fills and how good he looks. He's catching long balls too. So I am fine going to Antonio Brown in game stacks, but his stock did take a shot down here. Ronald Jones had a long receiving touchdown, but his role was still underwhelming. He had 9 carries and 2 targets in a negative game script. Leonard Fournette was still getting snaps late, even though Jones had that long touchdown. So Jones has flashes, but I really don't have a lot of desire to go at him in almost any scenario. I know I'm lowering him the most, but I honestly don't care too much because, like, he's burned me once this year for not using him, so I don't care all that much that I'm lower on Ronald Jones and others. I want to talk to you, though, about your read on this Tampa Bay offense. Are you changing anything? Are you still in on them, or am I just like blinded by my hatred for Twitter?
I love Twitter. It's great.
Your favorite, right?
No, I think that there are a lot of reasons to be in on this offense still. They have viable pass catchers. The issue is, I mean, I stacked this game a few ways, but I was in on Antonio Brown from a salary standpoint, so that was problematic. The issue, I think, is going to be hitting the right guys. I don't know how sticky target shares from one week to the other will be. I think that's the hardest part. We might want to overreact to what we saw this week with Antonio Brown's role, but before that it was good. So I think you just kind of have to take the chance. If anything, it might just put me higher on Tom Brady, which I think people will not really be on. So
I agree.
I still think it's a good passing offense.
I think it is worthwhile to be in on Tom Brady. The problem is they have a bye now. Like, they're kind of like the Chiefs, where they're just never on the main slate. Or they're on a bye. So Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams, you get one the rest of the way. Who you got?
Okay, so over the past 3 games where you mentioned the Tyreek Hill sample, he's at 174.3 air yards per game. Nobody else is above 150, and only 2 other guys are above 125. His workload in that sample is equal to 19.2 targets per game. Devontae's at 12.7, 105 air yards. Look, I love Devontae, but if you give me Tyreek Hill with his ADOT, and you give me like double-digit targets, it's really hard to rank anyone above that.
I think I agree. So let's move on to San Francisco at the Rams, and Not a game we were really in on, and I think it showed why, given the way that things played out. What did you see in this one here?
Not a whole lot. These teams are generally problematic from a market share standpoint. There were 43 total points, which isn't terrible. It's not great, obviously, but, and there were some solid showings, but nothing really slate changing. The 49ers won in a last second field goal, despite Nick Mullins just being mediocre. Negative .01 passing net expected points per drop back for him, but did pepper Deebo Samuel. He had 13 of 35 targets, which was 37%. For 134 yards despite 1 air yard. Nobody else had more than 6 targets. That was Jordan Reed. Kendrick Bourne had 4. We didn't see Brandon Ayuk in this game. He was definitely a key part of this passing offense prior. But if you look at the games with Deebo Samuel, he's 19% of the targets. The issue there is that 4 of those 5 games came with George Kittle, so you can't really trust that. But I think we can learn a lot from this game probably, even though there was no Ayuk. I would assume that Deebo Samuel is the top option, could settle in around 25% of the targets, could handle a carry or two, and he's up to 238 receiving yards on negative 41 air yards the past 3 games, which shouldn't really happen. So I think you can view that 2 ways. One is he's very good with the ball in his hands. The other is that he kind of has to do everything himself, and that's also not that predictive necessarily. So I don't know where I am with him, but the volume itself is fine. Just it's all behind the line of scrimmage or at the line of scrimmage for the most part. Jordan Reed's okay, 16% on targets, but I think that would probably drop with Ayuk back. Raheem Mostert returned, played 28 offensive snaps. He's played relevant snaps in 4 games now. He's averaged 20 adjusted opportunities per game, had 20 this week with 16 carries and 2 empty targets. Jeff Wilson had 12 carries. Jerick McKinnon had just 3. It's going to be Mostert's backfield, but even then, I think it's hard to predict big games with this offense under Nick Mullins. They play the Bills on Monday night, so I don't really have to build around Raheem Mostert on the main slate, which is always nice. The Rams also didn't have efficiency from the quarterback. Jared Goff, 198 yards, 31 attempts. No touchdowns, 2 picks, and Richard Sherman's return. Robert Woods was the featured guy. He had 12 of those targets for 80 yards. Josh Reynolds had 6. Cooper Kupp had 5. Kupp was trending toward being that guy with a great red zone role, and with Josh Reynolds actually kind of outperforming, out-targeting Robert Woods, but then it was Bobby Trees this week to lead the team. Since their Week 9 bye, Woods is up to a 29% target share, 10.7 per game. Kupp's at 21%. Reynolds is at 17%. They all get some downfield work. Reynolds gets the most. Kupp is really the only one with a significant red zone role as a receiver. It's kind of hard to figure out. This feels similar to the Buccaneers, but with maybe less upside in the offense. You could contradict me there, but
no, I think that's fair.
Anytime there are 3 receivers, you really have to have a good offense for me to feel great. Other than this backfield is the perfect example of what not to target in DFS. Malcolm Brown played 40% of the snaps. Darrell Henderson, 32%. Cam Akers, 27%. Cam Akers has scored 2 straight weeks, I believe now, but there's nothing here. They play the Cardinals next week, so I'll have interest in the passing offense, but I don't really know who you prefer.
He said, or Cam Akers, when he scored last week, said it's like blood in the water once you get that first one. I was like, I don't think you know what that phrase means, but he scored again, so maybe there is blood in the water for Cam Akers. With Deebo, I think the 25% target share that you projected with him with Ayuk is probably about right. I thought that you had bad data or something on the air yards thing, so I was looking up his air yards numbers.
I checked it 1,000,000 times.
Yeah, no, it sounds wrong, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like a fluke. It's not. His ADOT this year is 1.7. And I don't think that counts yesterday's game. So that's crazy, but we like the rushing. I would still put Kupp highest, I think, out of the Rams guys.
I was going to lean there just for the red zone work.
Yeah, red zone work, and also I think I trust the larger sample, going back to week 3 or whenever when Reynolds' role changed.
Yeah.
So I think that sample favors Kupp. So I'm still going to put Kupp first, especially next week against Arizona, where they struggle against slot guys. I think it's a good week to go at Kupp. Hopefully Kyler is healthy and we can stack that game. But I think that Kupp's number one. But I agree with your overall assertion that there are issues with the passing offense because they're not good enough to have widely distributed target shares. So I think it'll be a good game for Goff. I know that the Cardinals get pressure, but it should be a good game for him, I think, next week.
Kupp's at 24% in that sample. Woods at 22%. Reynolds at 16%.
Woods gets high leverage targets, so I think you can make the case for putting him first.
If you weight the targets, 10.7 for Kupp per game, 9.8 for Woods, 8 for Reynolds.
And I think Woods gets a couple more rushes per game than Kupp.
Yes.
So, even. But I favor Kupp by a tiny bit, which, again, is not the way I usually go with these things. Let's finish up here with Chicago at Green Bay, and Aaron Rodgers, shockingly, was incredible. The offense in general is humming, and part of the reason is that Akeem Hicks was out for the Bears. He is definitely a key cog for their defense, so not having Hicks matters, and I think that we should take note of that for the Bears. He was pretty close to playing this week, so I'd expect him to be back next week, but if he does miss more time, upgrade teams facing Chicago. The passing game pieces here didn't get to do much because Rodgers threw just 29 times, but it does look like Allen Lazard is going to have a role. Devontae Adams obviously led with 9 targets, but Lazard was second with 6. He also was second in air yards despite not getting a deep target. He also scored a short touchdown. So I'm going to put Lazard firmly second on this list among pass catchers behind Devontae. Marquez Valdez-Scantling was banged up going in and didn't get a target, so I think he's okay to cross off until we get reason to go back to him. But Lazard is at least on the radar for their game against Philly next week. I would also likely put Robert Tonyan above MVS for the time being. I don't want to target Tonyan, but I think I'm more inclined to use him than MVS. So big downgrade MVS, upgrade for Allen Lazard, and Devontae Adams stays the same. Aaron Jones' frustrating stretch continued here. He had 17 carries and just 2 targets. Jamal Williams also had 17 carries. In the 3 games with everyone healthy once again, Jones is averaging 13.3 carries and 3.3 targets per game. That is 21.3 adjusted opportunities. He's also at just 22% of the red zone chances. So I'm going to downgrade Jones even a bit more from where I was. He was already moving down my list, but he goes down more here. He does work in the right spots because he's kind of like Nick Chubb where he can do stuff. But there are multiple paths to failure here. I think I'm going to put Chubb and Jones in a similar tier because they have a ceiling, but Chubb has the better floor, I think, between the two potentially. Mitchell Trubisky did a lot of work in garbage time, and he did feed the ball to Allen Robinson, so that's kind of all you can ask for. He finished with .00 passing net expected points per dropback, which is well below average. It was minus .25 in the first half, but Trubisky let the ball fly. If you're going to be bad, at least let it rip, and he did. For the season, Trubisky has better efficiency marks than Nick Foles, and his average at the target is, I think, like 1.5 yards higher. So it's fair to consider this an upgrade, even if it wasn't very pretty for Mitchell Trubisky. So I actually am going to consider an upgrade for like Allen Robinson, and that's fine. As mentioned, he got the ball to Robinson a lot, which we will certainly take. Robinson had 13 targets. Darnell Mooney was second with 9, and then Anthony Miller and David Montgomery both had 6. Robinson had 5 red zone targets, and he turned it into 2 touchdowns. So Robinson is solid. Mooney gets an upgrade if Trubisky is an upgrade, but he hasn't caught anything this year. Like, it's been really bad. So I'm probably still not in on Mooney or Anthony Miller. Robinson, though, is his usual self, and that's a good thing for us. David Montgomery had a decent night. They couldn't really run because of the score, but he turned in 103 yards and 11 carries. That includes a 57-yarder. So even if you take that one out, he was still at about 5 yards per carry. So a good night for David Montgomery. That was in addition to 40 yards and a touchdown as a receiver. He had 3 red zone targets. So Montgomery's had that workload for a while, but he hasn't been able to convert on it. He did on Sunday, and I think that's important. So I think I saw enough here where I will consider him against Detroit next week because Detroit is so bad, but we just can't go overboard because we know bad things can happen. Despite the volume, there's still not really a floor there, and I have questions about the ceiling, but I am more willing to consider him now that I saw him actually get some yardage that was not there in the past. So air up a bit on David Montgomery and on Allen Robinson and on the offense in general, Trubisky, just because I like deep balls. Brandon, you've been lower on Aaron Jones too. Are you okay putting him in the Nick Chubb tier, or would you put him actually a tier below that?
You might be a tier below, honestly.
Okay.
The reason I've just been historically down on Aaron Jones is this is more of what his workload usually has been. It was better early on this season, and I changed my tune because you should change your opinion whenever you have more information. And right now, you have the information where he's not necessarily a featured back. He's the primary back in this like committee. Obviously, he's someone who can break some big plays. He can be involved as a receiver. He can score multiple touchdowns in a game. There's that fear, but right now, from a process standpoint, Nick Chubb is a tier above, I would say.
Okay, I think that's fair. Like I said, I put him below there, but I think I put him in the same tier, but I think putting him a tier below is more defensible than putting him above Nick Chubb. So I think that's probably the right take on that for sure. That is all the time that we have for today here on the Week 12 recap. We'll be back on Thursday to preview the Week 13 main slate. So make sure you are subscribed to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, no matter where you get your podcasts. We are at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, the Google Play Store, iHeartRadio, et cetera, radio.com, I believe. Make sure you're subscribed. And if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. Do not forget to enter in the Week 13 FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League, FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. And once that league is up, I will put a link to it in the post up on numberfire.com for this Week 12 recap podcast. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with your Monday and Tuesday night DFS slates. We'll talk to you once again on Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern to get you set for Week 13. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by Number Fire.